What's the secret to happy holidays with the family? Lots and lots of planning. When you're a grandparent, there's even more to consider, and you can find it all in A Grandparent's Guide to Happy Holidays. We put together a 12-page PDF guide with grandparent-tested and parent-approved advice on navigating the most common hotspots of family holidays. You'll be able to conquer the chaos with customizable, fillable worksheets for organizing every aspect of your holiday planning, from budgeting and gift giving to getting help in the kitchen. Avoid the holiday disappointment and check out the affiliate link for More Than Grand, and be sure to go over and pick up your new Grandparent's Guide to Happy Holidays. You're going to really enjoy how easy it is to lay out and talk about and plan your holidays, whether you're spending them with all the family and all the grandkids, or just some of the family and some of the grandkids. Either way, planning and communicating is key to making the holidays less stressful for everyone. Stephen Gomes is joining us to talk to us about the memories that he has of his grandfathers, what they meant to him as far as rounding out his childhood and helping him really develop into the great man that he is today. You're going to enjoy hearing these stories about how Grandpa comes over, hangs out, talks baseball, talks all sorts of sports, as well as being able to share wisdom about relationships, about how to navigate life. And we're going to hear how Stephen's dad has become an incredible grandfather himself. You are going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Stephen. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast.
Well, thanks, Greg. It's really great to be here today.
I'm excited to talk to you and learn more about your grandfather, the relationship you had, and the lasting impact that he's had on your life.
Well, I appreciate that. I know from some other discussions he come up a little bit, and I'm excited to talk more about that.
Absolutely. Now, as we get started, could you give us a little background to introduce us to your grandfather?
Well, he grew up in a really interesting time. His parents lived in San Francisco in 1906. When the big earthquake hit and the fires. So after that happened, they didn't have a place to work or live, so they ended up moving south. They ended up in San Juan Bautista for a year, and then Hollister. And he was born in 1907, so right after all of that stuff happened, where they relocated, and that's where he spent his entire life, in Hollister, California. He went to school there. Yeah, he loved sports. They had CCS even back then. You know, he lettered in baseball, football, and track. They took CCS championships in football and baseball. He had multiple awards in track. He was a great athlete. He went to school in San Jose and then back to Hollister. Got married, ended up taking over the family business there. My great-grandparents had built the Model French Laundry down there, big commercial laundry. As a kid, I thought it was just huge. You know, this giant place. As a little kid, I could walk into the dryers and things like that. It's building still in the family. I went back there and realized it still is huge. It's half a block long. This huge wide section, a quarter of a block wide, half a block long, has this big roll of doors in the back for the trucks to roll in and do stuff. So it was really big. But, you know, that was where his life was centered. But he was really, really about family. You know, I think he instilled that in me to the extent where I'm dying to have grandkids. I'm not saying I'm putting pressure on my kids yet, but I kind of am. You know, just love the times I spent with them.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I love getting some of those backgrounds because it's just so interesting where everybody's grandfathers, where everybody's family comes from, especially hearing that his folks were part of that big earthquake and fire and everything else that was going on. It's incredible to think that, like, you're only 3 generations removed from that experience.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And I would even hear stories from his mom. She lived to 102. I mean, not just lived, I mean, really lived to 102. Was living on her own, taking care of herself, doing her own cooking and all that kind of stuff. And heard incredible stories, about all that stuff. It was one of the things that carried through was, I think, because of his love of baseball. When I remember pulling up to her house, window would be open, and I hear the Giants game blasting through the open window. She'd have the radio just blasting because her hearing wasn't the greatest, when after she got into her 90s. So she just had the baseball game just blasting through the house, just listening, and come in and have a visit with her, sit down, have a cup of tea or coffee, and just chat. She was just a kick too. One of the things that I do remember about my grandfather was great was when I was a kid, every Saturday morning, he would be at our house. He would come over, he'd sit down in the kitchen with my mom, have a cup of coffee, they'd chat for a little bit, and after that, he would focus all his attention on me. He would just start talking to me about school and what I was doing, my friends. We'd always end up talking about sports, either stuff I was playing or what's going on with the baseball team or football team. And I just felt that I was like the center of his universe at that point. I was getting all of his attention. Most of the time we'd end up outside where, he'd do everything from, show me the right way to hold a baseball, and how to get the right spin. He wanted me to be a pitcher. We'd go out on our ranch, and my mom hated this. He loved to pick mushrooms. So we go out on our ranch and hunt mushrooms, and she was always nervous, but no one ever had an issue, got sick or anything like that. But she was always nervous. We do that. We'd go out shooting. A lot of times we'd shoot basketball. We just do all kinds of fun stuff like that. So he'd spend a good half day with me every week.
Oh, wow.
And I just love that stuff. And he really got me motivated into sports. My dad was great. I realized between the two of them, I had such a full life. My dad, he loved cars. He loved mechanical stuff. He loved hot rods. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to drive a car. I was driving on my own on the ranch when I was 7 years old, which is maybe a little scary. Driving big tractors and semi trucks when I was 10, 11 years old. And then, he also was very involved in business. He did a lot of other things too, but he had the dairy, we had a cattle ranch, but he was involved in a lot of other events. He was on boards. He was on the National Dairy Council and doing, advertising marketing programs with them. And I learned a lot about business from my dad. He co-founded a regional newspaper and did a bunch of great stuff, but he was never that into sports. And, he wasn't into fishing, wasn't into that kind of thing. And my grandfather was into all of those things. So I kind of had the whole gamut. I didn't realize until I kind of got your ideas on the notes and stuff for this podcast, started looking back and realizing what a full life I had. Because my dad was there for a lot of stuff, but all those other pieces, my grandfather filled in. And so I had I thought about this, I'm like, wow, I had everything.
Yeah, so, and like you said, it totally well-rounded, because I think I had a little bit of a similar situation. My father was very focused on business, the family. He was not the handiest guy in the world. He didn't really enjoy camping. Like, he would take us out every once in a while on a fathers and sons camping trip, but it was definitely car camping. But the grandfather, when I went to the high desert area of eastern Oregon, he was taking me out through the farm. He was taking us up into the mountains of Idaho with the camper and doing all that stuff. And so we did have a little bit of that. Like, summertime, we got exposed to some of the outdoor stuff through my grandfather, and then my dad exposed us to some of the other activities, meeting buddies from work and that sort of thing.
Yeah. It was, I get where you're coming from. I had that same kind of thing. So, like I said, the sports stuff, I really got my grandfather. I was in sports all growing up, played a lot of baseball and basketball, and even played tennis and soccer and a bunch of other stuff. So I played all through high school. I played sports in college, which is why my knees are probably as bad as they are now, all the stuff I did. But I wouldn't have done it differently.
Oh,
I loved it.
Sure.
And, my grandfather, I remember for years, he would just be there every Saturday. It was just like clockwork. And then as he got a bit older, the visits became less frequent. And then we started going to visit with him a lot. And so we would do that, a couple times a month we drive out there. He's about 40 minutes away. It wasn't super far. He was in Hollistersville, and we were in Morgan Hill, which is, about 40 minutes north. And, and still enjoyed the visits and always make time to talk with him and what's going on in his life as well. At that point, I realized it wasn't all about me anymore. And I started talking to him about his life and learning more about him growing up and doing the things he did. And he always had that love of sports, particularly baseball. And he lived long enough that he, got to see me graduate and get married and all that stuff. But unfortunately, didn't make it to see me have grandkids. So that part didn't happen. But he stuck around for a good long time. And I just smile. I think about this too. When I was a little kid, I remember he had, for me at the time, this really old car. It was a 1954 Dodge sedan, powder blue. And I'd always hear him come pulling up into the driveway. And he had that car for the longest time. He probably had it for a good 20 years before he finally got something new. And my dad loved that car. When he sold it, my dad was shattered because he really wanted it. He thought it was a great collector car. And it was in pristine condition. It was always garage. I think the only time he drove it was to our house and back to his place practically, and maybe to the grocery store. And I just remember that rolling in and riding in that thing with the big bench seats and no seat belts back in the day and all that kind of stuff. And, it just makes me smile when I think about those things. Even though he's gone, it's still in my head like it was yesterday. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how the stories and some of the reminiscences come back, and then it's like you could almost sit down at the kitchen table and you smell the coffee, you smell everything that's going on around the farm, and it's like you could almost pick everything right back up with some of those memories.
Yeah, I mean, just in thinking about stuff and prepping for our talk today, it just put a smile on my face. I just started thinking about all these other things I hadn't thought about for a while. And my grandfather on the other side was very, very, very business oriented, like my dad, but even more so. Didn't have that cool classic car, but he was the kind of guy that bought a new Cadillac every 2 years or, that kind of thing. But he was very, very grounded in business. I mean, he did very well. And I remember this, though. Never felt like he was into kids, not everybody's the same.
Yeah.
And so we were there, and I'd spend the night at their place every now and then. And my grandmother would dote on me, and he would say hi in the morning, and be there for breakfast. Then he would just disappear and go off and do his thing. But my grandfather on my mom's side was kind of the polar opposite. He was all about family and all about the kids and grandkids. And so I'm hopefully going to be that someday for my kids when they have theirs. Looking forward to that one-on-one time. Right. I want to do that same kind of thing and show them they are the center of my universe. Sitting there talking to them, they are what's important. I probably won't be the one introducing them to sports because both of my kids ended up being great athletes. So they're very much into that. My son still plays, club level basketball right now. He's in his later 20s. And my daughter's now into rock climbing and indoor rock climbing. She did a triathlon when she was in school, all that kind of stuff. So I don't think I'll be able to introduce my grandkids to sports, but I'll support it,
right.
And how that one-on-one time was the most important thing to me.
Well, And I want to make a little bit of a detour here because I am a baseball fan, and talking and hearing about your grandfather's love of baseball and all that. Did they ever talk to you about the Seals and the Pacific Coast League and any of those memories?
Way back, I remember a little bit of that, but the big focus I remember was on when the Giants moved out here. He was just ecstatic when the Giants came to San Francisco,
Yeah.
and he would tell me about how great that was. And I mean, even like I said, my great grandmother pulling up, when she was in her 90s into over 100, just have the games blasting as they came pulling up to the house, that kind of thing. And she actually outlived my grandfather. She made it to almost 103.
Okay.
And my grandfather made it into his 80s, but that was, that was it for him.
Yeah.
But still, he had a good life.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other part that that stuck with me through all this stuff was my mom was a lot like my grandfather, all about family. Just very, very focused, and that got passed to her. And I'm not saying my dad wasn't. My dad loved us. We spent a lot of quality time together, but he was so involved with business that on Saturday mornings he was working.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't around.
Right.
But my grandfather would be there.
Well, and it's interesting too how there's a little bit of personality, and then there's also a little bit, I think, of cultural expectations that go on, because I have talked with a lot of people, especially folks that had grandparents that were a lot older, where it was still somewhat where grandfathers would come in, they would kind of check on things, make sure stuff's okay, but dealing with grandkids was more of a grandma type thing.
Yeah.
But it does come down to personality too, is how much you're engaged, how much do you want to be engaged jumps into it. And it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't love you. It just means that, hey, are they going to have the personality to get down on the floor and play Hot Wheels with you? Or are they going to walk the fence line and look for rabbits, or, whatever that might be?
I think that's a very, very true statement. I also think that by and large, each generation tries to do an even better job for their kids. I know that my dad was a much better parent to me than his father was to him. And I think the same thing on my mom's side. You try to do the best you can for your kids and keep setting the bar higher and higher. And personalities are a lot to do with it. My grandfather, his name was Leon Jean Latipi. His parents, when they were very young, well, his mother came over from France when she was just a little kid. I think she lived in France till about 8. And then they came out here. And so he was fluent in French because that's what they spoke in the home. But they were about family, but it was also a lot harder time. They had to work really, really hard. And he had to work at the family business and spend a lot of time there and do that. And then as he raised kids, I think there was less emphasis for them having to work and contribute. They were getting through without having to do that stuff, and spent more time with the family. And then when it came to my mom, she was more about, all about family. In fact, my mom got her teaching credentials and all that stuff ready to go. Her dream was to be a teacher, and then had me and said, okay, I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm going to stay home and be a mom. And my brother followed almost 5 years later. And so she did the books for the family, company and family business, and raised the kids and did a decent job of that, I have to say. But I think it was, again, that family thing was instilled on her side from her father and her mother, and it continues on. So I'm looking forward to doing that at some point. Hopefully my kids will well, my son's actually talking about it, so I'm not going to pressure him. I think it'd be good to start a family before 30. It's like, okay, all right, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, one of the pluses is you do have a lot more energy, and can get down and do some things. I think somewhere around mid 30s to late 30s is when the knees start to not work quite as well. And you do start getting some of that stuff. And again, that's not to pressure anybody, but it's just one of those things like, hey, you guess what? You do start to get older as you start hitting your mid 30s.
Yeah, my business partner's probably never going to be able to really enjoy grandkids. Um, he is in his mid 50s and he has a 4-year old.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, they're basically about 50 years apart.
Wow.
So he'll look like the grandpa at a
Right.
graduation.
Right.
So we'll see. Unless they can clone replacement body shells for him by that time.
Yeah, you never know. But so, Stephen, talk to me a little bit about how that relationship started to evolve. You talked to us about how your grandfather came over to your place all the time, and then eventually you guys started going over to his place. But how did that relationship from when you were 7 and driving the tractor on the farm, how did that start to evolve?
Well, it just was such an easy transition into that stuff. I think that the earliest memories I have is that he was just always there. It wasn't like he just started to show up. So as far back as I can remember, he'd be there every week visiting. Um, and so I never really felt like, something suddenly changed or things like that. But as he got a little bit older and it was getting harder for him to make the trek out every week, I just didn't even think about it. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to go see him, that kind of thing. And would just make the trek out there to do it. Again, it was only 40 minutes. It wasn't a big long drive. And fortunately, I'm from another thing from my dad. When I was 15, I bought my dream car back in the day. I bought a 67 Camero.
Oh,
And with my dad's help, we put 32 coats of hand rubbed lacquer on it, had the entire interior redone, built a beautiful engine for it, did all the hot roddy things back in the day that you're supposed to do in the 70s it was late 70s. And so I had my wheels so I could go visit my grandfather whenever I felt like it. And a lot of times you just go as a family, there'd be like on a Sunday, we'd head out and go visit with them in Hollister and spend time with them. And so it just felt seamless, just keeping the connection, whatever way.
yeah.
It definitely changed when I went off to college because then I wasn't nearby. So I'd only get to see him on the holidays at that point or, coming back for part of the summer. And, but we still stayed close. And it was great, though. I mean, he got to see me shortly after I graduated. I got married and so he was around for all of that stuff, but it wasn't much longer after that he passed.
Sure. And did you find that your conversations started to get, well, obviously they change as we all get older, but do you remember any really meaningful or deeper conversations like in your high school years as you're starting to think towards college and in the future?
We did. And as I got older, the conversations started to be less they weren't as much me centric. When I was little, it was always about me, what I'm doing, what's this, what am I doing here? What do I like? What do I not like? What am I enjoying? That part evolved to where I started asking more questions about what's going on in his life, learning what he was doing, what things he really enjoyed. He talked to me a little bit about relationships and things like that. Don't rush into it, that kind of thing. It's just, take things slow. Life is long. You've got plenty of time to make your choices and your decisions. Choose well, that kind of thing. He also instilled that family first part, which is something I strive to do with my kids. Not a dig against my dad. He was a great provider and he was there for me a lot of the time, but he was very much a workaholic. So, he didn't come to my sporting events. My mom would come. My grandfather a lot of times would show up if I was playing baseball or something like that. He'd make it to the game, which was great. My dad loved me. He was super supportive, but he didn't have the time to take off, during the week and go watch me play a game or something like that.
Sure.
However, when he fully retired, let me tell you, he was at every one of his grandkids' games.
Okay.
Wasn't wrapped up in business. He was there. So my dad did that as a grandfather. So my son and daughter got to see plenty of him whenever they were playing it. My son was playing basketball or soccer or hockey. For my daughter for her swimming meets and things like that. He was definitely there. I coached, I coached my son's little league teams, and he would be there for those games and all that stuff. So I realized a lot of it was, I think his mindset was he's got to be a good provider first, and being a good father was being a good provider, so the kids didn't have to want for anything. And like I say, once he retired, that kind of changed, and then he was there. But now I was no longer in sports really at that point. But then he got to enjoy his grandkids,
Oh
and
yeah.
was there for them. And so he took over that role with my kids, and he was there a lot. And so that part was really cool.
Well, that's awesome. And he probably picked up stuff that your grandfather was doing, right? Because a lot of what we end up doing as dads, as people in business, whatever, is we get some good modeling and some good mentors that we try to emulate a little bit, whether it's conscious or subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's great that he even had that modeling and that role model that he could see what he was doing with you. And then it's like, oh yeah, as soon as I'm retired, man, here we go.
Yeah, I think that was it. And the grandkids became a big part of his life. Things that he did with me when I was a kid, he also did with them. You know, he'd buy the mini bikes and fix them up and trick them out with the grandkids and do that kind of stuff. Remember with my dad, we did that same thing. We built a go-kart, you know, we did all kinds of fun stuff. So he did that with the grandkids. Plus he was supportive in the other things because he had that time available. I think that was part of it, you know, to where he could go to their games, their different events, school functions he would go to, you know, every graduation, that kind of stuff. I shouldn't say he always went to all my graduations too. I'm going to say he avoided those.
Right.
But it very much became more family centric, and that was possibly modeling based after what he saw my grandfather doing.
Sure. Yeah. Were there any activities that your grandfather did with you that you knew, like, okay, this is me and granddad time? You know, because he was around quite a bit, and I do talk to folks where if grandparents live close by, there's maybe not as much, hey, this is the special thing. Like with me, my grandfather was going to the A&W in town because that was completely different from what we'd normally do.
For me, going mushroom hunting with my grandfather was the coolest thing because I knew my mom hated it. She would hate it, but it was her dad, so we were going to go do it. Darn it. And so we would go do that stuff. We pick the mushrooms and, okay, we need to cook these up, you know, blah, 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 blah. My mom would always be so nervous. But, and that was something that no one else in the family did. I was the only one that did that with him. And that was our thing. We'd go out and we would do that. And growing up on the ranch, where we also had a dairy there with 500 head, there was plenty of fertilizer for the mushrooms, shall we say. So it was always an adventure. But that was something fun. And little tricks that he would show me, you know, I thought were so special. Like, you know, he really wanted me to be a pitcher. And so he would show me how to hold the baseball and how to work the seams for the different pitches and things like that, that haven't changed to this day. You know, that's the thing. They're still valid to this day. So those are just some fun things, you know, that I'll never forget. Or how to, he bought me my first fly reel and showed me how to cast and do things like that, you know, and where'd I learn that? Every time I do it, you know, it was from him. So those are things that every time I do it, I can think back on that and smile.
That's awesome. And it's a great reminder too, I think, for grandfathers and folks in general, is that you don't have to sit down and really plan something elaborate out. It's doing something, you know, little that's just you and the grandchild, but it becomes kind of your thing. And then that's something that you always remember. Like you said, when you go fly fishing, it's like, oh yeah, probably like 10 and 2, or, you know, oh yeah, granddad used to, you know, hammer that into me.
Exactly. You know, my kids had a little bit of a different experience where, you know, the grandparents would take them to Hawaii or Disney World or something like that, which was fun. But my son really didn't like that as much. He really liked the personal time. that he would get. And that's where my dad really stepped in heavily and did that. I say it was after he retired. And so I think my son really, really appreciated that part of it. My daughter, she liked spending time with grandma and cooking and doing all kinds of stuff like that, and really gravitated to that side of it. So both of my parents really spent a lot of time with my kids when they were younger. Tougher now. My son's down in San Diego. My daughter is in Minneapolis right now going to school. So that's a tough trek to go back and forth on a weekend. But still, every time she comes into town, she spends a day with grandma.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's cool. Yeah.
Hey, are there any lasting memories or experiences with your grandfather that I haven't asked you about or we haven't brought up that you'd like to talk about?
I think I covered all the stuff that really left the strongest memories in my head. The biggest thing to go back and talk about again is just how I felt that I was the center of his universe. It's just how he made me feel really special. Like I felt like he was coming out there just for me every week. And just the time of getting his focus and his attention, indelible. I'll never forget those.
Anything else that around ideas and experiences that you had with your grandfathers, and even things that you saw with your dad, that you think grandfathers could pick up on and maybe add to their toolkit?
Well, I think the most important thing when you're being a grandfather is to spoil the kids rotten, just do everything that you shouldn't do, and then give them back to the parents when you're done. So you can have all the fun. It's the payback time. Sure, Timmy, have another candy. Here's some ice cream. Okay, time to put you back now. No, seriously, I think grandkids are a reward. They are. I think that they are the reward because you can have all the fun parts of being a parent without all the responsibility. And so that's why I'm really looking forward to getting into that slot someday soon.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that my grandparents overly spoiled me, but they did indulge me quite a bit. And I don't think it ruined me as a person, but I think it made me really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to doing some of the same. Just quality time with the kids is the most important thing. Whether we go to Hawaii or Disney World or take them someplace exotic, I don't think it's the location as much as the connection that's the important part.
Oh, that's great advice, because I know it. I keep kind of coming back to it, where it seems like over and over again, folks talk about it's the simple times, the connection, the sharing of space, the sharing of a pizza over the kitchen table, something along those lines, that seems to really be the strongest memories.
Yeah, we had huge family dinners for holidays, things like that, where everybody get together. Those are great memories too. So the grandparents on both sides would be there, aunts and uncles. To this day, we carry on the tradition. My brother and I now cover all the holidays for the family. So we do our traditional things for Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, that kind of stuff that we do. And so we picked up that tradition, and we invite all of our relatives that are around and friends. And we continue that tradition. And those are some of the most fun times because it's just about friends, family, and food. In fact, I like Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday because it's not getting stuck in all about gifts and things like that. It's really about spending time with people, enjoying the time, having a great meal together. It's my favorite holiday.
No, it's definitely with the big family get-togethers at Thanksgiving or other holidays. Yeah, that's the fun part. It's going outside, playing soccer, throwing the footballs, doing whatever. And then, of course, coming in and maybe watching a little football game afterwards.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Stephen, this has been an absolute blast, and I've loved learning more about your relationship with your grandfather. So thank you again so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Well, Greg, thanks. It's been wonderful taking a little trip down memory lane And like I say, it was nice to really think about and realize how blessed I was. I had a great dad, but my grandfather really rounded out my life as a kid growing up, and I'll always appreciate that.
Well, thanks again, and we'll stay connected.
Absolutely, I would love that.
I really enjoyed having Stephen on the podcast. It was great to listen to the impact that his grandfathers have had on him, what that influence was. And I especially liked how we were able to talk about how important it is to have great modeling behaviors so that when it's time for us to become a grandfather, a leader, a mentor, a father, whatever that role is that we're stepping into, if we've had men before us really be able to model that kind of behavior that we want to emulate, that makes things a lot easier so that we're not just wandering around in the dark. We have a real guide that has been in our lives to help us show the way. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and do me a favor, share it with 3 friends or family members that would enjoy listening to Stephen's conversation about his grandfathers. And until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.